question of the pupil. You seem to be suggesting that according to Gurdjieff, the source of all our troubles is that there is a break in the chain of energetic production in us. What exactly does this mean? The teacher replies, I have explained that Ouspensky misinterpreted and misunderstood Gurdjieff at almost every turn. Indeed, we could say at every turn. However, Ouspensky has recorded very, very accurately. He was a journalist, remember. He has recorded very, very accurately many things that Gurdjieff said and many things that Gurdjieff explained to him. This means that Ouspensky's writings, and in particular the book In Search of the Miraculous, are extraordinarily valuable documents. When we look at this book, In Search of the Miraculous, we can see that Ouspensky appears to have recorded extremely well, extremely clearly, exactly what the problem is. And this lies in the fact that Ouspensky has recorded 2 food diagrams. Now, I have explained that what Gurdjieff was teaching was a transformation. We are living at too low a level. We must raise the energetic level of the whole organism up to a much higher level in a transformation before any individual development can begin. This is an energetic process. It's not a matter of psychology. But Ouspensky has recorded 2 food diagrams. The first of these shows what we can describe, in fact, in reality, as a depleted energetic state. The first food diagram. This depicts visually our depleted energetic state as ordinary men and women. This is the start of the transformation. But Gurdjieff apparently also gave to Ouspensky what appears to be an augmented food diagram. But in fact, this is the normal, and I choose my words carefully here, this is the normal energetic state that we should have. So this is the end of the transformation that Gurdjieff is teaching. So we are inducing in ourselves an energetic change. And it is an energetic change from the first food diagram, as Ouspensky depicts it, which appears to be a depleted energetic state of the ordinary man or woman. We're going from this to the second food diagram, which appears actually to be an augmented energetic state, but is actually the normal. This is how we should be. And the difference, when we examine it, between the 2 food diagrams lies in the receipt of the food of impressions. Now, the break in the question, if we go back to your question, the break in the chain of energetic production in us. It is about food, but this is not, and this is why we need to study this book, In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky, and Gurdjieff's teaching. We need to study this very carefully. It's not obvious to the ordinary man, because when we refer to food, we are not referring simply to just ordinary food and water. Although ordinary food and water is very important, it is actually essential, and there are essential elements that we require in that ordinary food and water that can only come from food. Higher elements, minerals, vitamins, that we must make sure that we have, and that we have in abundance. So it is about food, ordinary food and water, which we must change to make it, in fact, shall we say, nourishing. Not in the sense of acquiring carbohydrates or calories or protein, this nonsense that is part of the psychology of the ordinary man, but in terms of these essential elements which science knows something about, but maybe not everything. We start to use, for example, sea salt, because the sea washes over all the rocks on the whole planet, and thus has a mix of minerals, some of which are known, some of which are unknown, but which we require and we can only obtain from food. We have a mass of other essential elements, essential meaning they can only come from our food. We have a mass of other essential elements, known and unknown, that we require. But when we speak of food, we are not just speaking about food and drink in the ordinary sense of the word. We are talking about the three foods that are described very clearly and extremely well by Ouspensky in the book In Search of the Miraculous. That is to say, ordinary food and water is one food, taken in at a certain level. In addition to this, we have food, elements, energies from the air and the atmosphere, taken in a variety of different ways, and equally as complex as ordinary food and water in its makeup, or even perhaps more complex. And then we have what is described by Gurdjieff to Ouspensky as the food of impressions, coming from perception. These are energies about which we know nothing. We don't even suspect that they exist until we read the book, Ouspensky's book, In Search of the Miraculous. So we have three kinds of foods. Now, to go back to your question, the break in the chain of energetic production in us is that we don't actually receive, as we should, this food of impressions. The food of impressions sounds in us, according to the food diagrams, and this will sound like nonsense to those who haven't read this book and who haven't become integrated with our work here. It will sound like nonsense, but the food of impression sounds in us only as do in an octave. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. It sounds in us only as do. It does not develop as it should, as a food. It is not digested as it should be. So the major part of our work here is in fact about something about which the ordinary man knows nothing and does not even suspect the existence of. That is to say, a food, an energy coming from impressions, in turn from our perception. A food coming from perception. The ordinary man takes his perception of the world, his experience of the world, as if that is the world. Well, of course it is the world, but it's only a picture of the world, and it can be augmented. Our perception is not a given. Our experience of the world is not a given. It is something that we create in our own way. Now, I've probably confused you enormously there, But those who have read the book by Ouspensky, In Search of the Miraculous, will start to understand what I'm talking about. The break in the chain of energetic production in us is that we don't receive the food of impressions as we should. We don't therefore have the energies, again, energies of a kind that are unknown to the ordinary man or woman, unknown to science, and yet clearly exist. We can prove that they exist. There is a break in the chain of energetic production in us. We don't receive the food of impressions coming from perception as we should. Therefore, we don't have the energies we should have, and we fall to a very, very low energetic level, the first food diagram as Ouspensky presents it. Therefore, this is the area in which we are going to work. To encourage, to provide conditions, to engage in tasks, techniques, to allow the food of impressions to sound in us as they should. In turn, using the food diagrams, we can see that this allows also the energies that come from the air and the atmosphere in us as a food. It allows these to develop even more. And we arrive at a state in which we are, or we have, the energetic background pictured by Ouspensky in the book In Search of the Miraculous as a second food diagram, which appears an augmented energetic state, but is in fact a normal. This is how we should be. We should have all these energies, and all these energies at a much, much higher level than we have now. So we've fallen to such a low energetic level, the first food diagram. And our work is to a transformation, to ascend the stairway, as Gurdjieff explained it to Ouspensky. Our work is to transform the first food diagram into the second food diagram. And this second food diagram depicts the energetic background we should have as normal men and women at the end of the transformation. Once we have crossed the final threshold of the stairway, once we've ascended the stairway. This is the energetic background we should have. And only then, with this energetic background, depicted in the second food diagram from Ouspensky, can our own individual development actually begin. Well, let's try and get the notes at least recorded, and then we can put them in some sort of order. So this is the start of it. We can question whether in the course of our lives it is possible for us to improve or to develop in some way. I always start my talks by saying that there are two completely different teachings associated with Gurdjieff. There is the traditional teaching ascribed to Gurdjieff. I call it the Gurdjieff tradition, which actually comes from Ouspensky. Then, on the other hand, there is Gurdjieff's own teaching, coming from his writings and particularly from his book, The Tales of Beelzebub to His Grandson. These two teachings are completely different. Those in the Gurdjieff tradition, coming from Ouspensky, may claim that the teaching in this tradition cannot be defined. This is not true. The Gurdjieff tradition actually claims that ordinary men and women can develop during their lives by means of efforts on their part, known as work on oneself. And that this development is the development in them of their consciousness. However, when we examine what Gurdjieff himself wrote, we find he claims that ordinary men and women cannot develop in any way during their lives, and that any attempt to do so does not work and only makes their situation worse. He explains that before any individual development can take place, a complete and complex transformation is necessary to raise the energetic level of the whole organism to a much higher level. Only then, after this transformation, which he described to Ouspensky as a stairway, and at this much higher level, only then can any individual development even begin. Gurdjieff's actual teaching, as described in his writings, was about this transformation necessary before any individual development can begin, and was aimed at aiding this transformation. Describing his teaching as recorded by Ouspensky and in the language of Ouspensky, Gurdjieff was asked the question, from where does the way begin? Gurdjieff replied, the way begins at a level much higher than the level of ordinary life. Between ordinary life and the way lies the stairway. Only when the last threshold on the stairway has been crossed does the way begin. Therefore, the questions, can we improve or develop during our lives, and if so, how? From these we find two completely different answers, manifesting as two completely different teachings. The Gurdjieff tradition, coming from Ouspensky, claims that we can develop by means of efforts on our part. These efforts are fundamentally psychological efforts known as the work, the method, or as work on oneself. Gurdjieff himself, however, writes that we cannot change or develop in any way. Firstly, we must change the energetic background to our lives, thus raising the overall energetic level of the whole organism to a new level. And that only at this new level can our individual development begin. Further, this change in energies cannot be achieved by psychological means. It must be achieved by the gradual and patient application of practical techniques handed down from teachers to pupils. I add here, the Gurdjieff tradition has misunderstood the nature of these techniques. Now, we go on further. Gurdjieff's teaching is not philosophical nor psychological. We can extract from his writings and from what he is recorded to have told Ouspensky that there is a break in the chain of energetic production in us as ordinary men and women. We do not receive as food the energies we should, and live as a result in an energetically depleted state. This becomes worse and worse. We thus fall into internal structures from which we cannot escape. We do not have the appropriate energies to maintain ourselves as distinct from these structures. We are trapped in them. This is an abnormal situation, and we create in ourselves, thus, an abnormal psychology. The psychology is an adaptation of our lives to the fact that we have fallen to such a low and depleted energetic state, that we are trapped in inner structural situations from which we cannot emerge. We cannot change our psychology by psychological means. Our psychology is a consequence of a cause. That is, a consequence of our being trapped in inner structures. To change the consequences of a cause, that is, our psychology, without changing the cause, means that the consequences, our abnormal psychology, will simply revert back in time to what it was previously, the cause remaining the same. To try to change our psychology by psychological means does not work, and only disrupts our already established state, achieving nothing. We must prove this to ourselves. Gurdjieff spoke to Ouspensky about man the machine. Ouspensky records this, writing that man is a machine. This is not true. There are a large number of scientific laws that prove that organic beings, including man, are not machines. We must therefore look for the meaning intended by Gurdjieff in speaking of man the machine. A machine is a complex device made by man in order to perform a specific function or functions, and it always has an operator. Gurdjieff was thus, by speaking of man as a machine, defining the exact extent of his teaching. He was teaching about man, the machine, and not about the operator of the machine. He was teaching mechanics, not psychology. There is a break in the chain of energetic production in us, and we have fallen to a very low energetic level. We are, as a result, trapped in internal structural situations from which we cannot emerge. Trapped in this way, we create for ourselves an abnormal psychology. We cannot change this abnormal psychology by psychological means, because it is merely a consequence of a cause. Gurdjieff was showing that we must look at the cause of the abnormalities in our psychology. That is, our structural and energetic situation. We must look at the machine and not at the operator. Ouspensky misunderstood Gurdjieff and misdirected his pupils by paradoxically claiming man is a machine, and then teaching in London from 1921 to 1941 his system, which is about the operator of the machine. That is, about control of the machine, or psychology. This teaching became the Gurdjieff tradition, coming from Uspensky. It is not Gurdjieff's teaching. The question of the pupil. You have suggested that although Gurdjieff was showing that we have an abnormal psychology, he was not actually teaching about psychology, because our abnormal psychology is a consequence of a cause. And you say that the cause of our abnormal psychology, the cause that Gurdjieff was pointing out, is that we have fallen to such a low energetic level that we are trapped in internal structures from which we cannot escape. Now, this is a very strange idea to encounter. Could you give us an example of what it was that, or what it is that Gurdjieff means by these internal structures, and how does being trapped in these internal structures, as you say we are, because we have such a low energetic level, how does this create in us an abnormal psychology as a consequence? Could you explain this a little bit more to us? The teacher replies. The question of the pupil. You have suggested that although Gurdjieff was showing that we have an abnormal psychology, he was not actually teaching about psychology, because our abnormal psychology is a consequence of a cause. And you say that the cause of our abnormal psychology, the cause that Gurdjieff was pointing out, is that we have fallen to such a low energetic level that we are trapped in internal structures from which we cannot escape. Now, this is a very strange idea to encounter. Could you give us an example of what it was that, or what it is that Gurdjieff means by these internal structures, and how does being trapped in these internal structures, as you say we are, because we have such a low energetic level, how does this create in us an abnormal psychology as a consequence? Could you explain this a little bit more to us? The teacher replies. In answer to this, I have to say again that there are two completely different teachings associated with the name of Gurdjieff. There is the traditional teaching ascribed to Gurdjieff, which all the teachers are teaching, which actually comes from Uspensky. It is a misinterpretation, a misunderstanding of Gurdjieff's teaching. And there is also Gurdjieff's own teaching, as recorded by him in his own book, The Tales of Beelzebub, to his grandson, which is completely different. However, there is a certain amount of overlap, in a sense. Now, your question is, how is it, or rather, your question is, what structures, internal structures, are we trapped in? And by being trapped in these structures, that is, by not having the energies necessary to maintain ourselves as distinct from these structures lead to an abnormal psychology, and how? Now, if we take the most obvious, Gurdjieff throughout his writings refers to human beings on the earth and elsewhere in the universe, if we can imagine such things. He refers to us as three-brained or three-centered beings. This is a structure. We have three centers. Now, what Gurdjieff is saying, that we have fallen into this structure. This is a structure that exists. It should exist. It's part of a normal existence that we have three centers. But the teaching that Gurdjieff is putting forward is that we have fallen into this structure and cannot maintain ourselves as distinct from this structure. It should not be this way, in the sense that there should be three centers. Now, I know that Ouspensky writes there are not three centers in the ordinary man, which is why I suggest that there are two completely different teachings. But Gurdjieff says there are three centers. But his idea, his teaching being put forward is that we have three centers, we are three-centered beings, and we cannot maintain ourselves as a fourth entity, as distinct from these three centers, because we don't have the energies to do so. So it's not a matter of psychology, it's not a matter of willpower, it's not a machismo situation, as the Gurdjieff tradition might suggest. It's simply we don't have the energies to maintain ourselves as a fourth entity, as distinct from having three centers. We've fallen into the situation where we have three centers. Now, what are the psychological consequences of this? The consequences of this psychologically are that we have an abnormal psychology. If we take the first instance, we are trapped in three centers, so we cannot observe ourselves. This is an abnormality. Now, Gurdjieff suggests self-observation as a task. We can read in the book published as Views from the Real World, attributed to Gurdjieff. I think it's New York, March 1924. Self-observation is enough in the beginning, Gurdjieff says. Do not try anything else. Self-observation is enough for several years. Do not try anything else. And Gurdjieff is explicit. The reason we are trying to observe ourselves is to come to the conclusion eventually that we cannot do it. So this is an abnormality of our psychology. Gurdjieff is not talking about simple things. He's not expressing the childlike teaching that is given in the Gurdjieff tradition. This is a complex teaching. Try to observe yourself for several years. Do not try anything else to come to the conclusion that you cannot do it. Now, why can't we observe ourselves? Why are we abnormal in the sense that we can't observe ourselves? Because we are trapped in three centers, and there is a flow of the energy of attention, an energy, a very subtle energy, a process that is constantly going on in us. A flow from one center to another. So at any one time, only one center out of the three is in fact operating and or is able to be in contact with the world around us. So we're only ever in one center, and by the time we realize we are in that center, if we ever do, we are already moving on to another center. So there is this constant flow from one center to another. At one moment we are in the head, the intellectual center. And as soon as we even start to realise this, we've already moved into the chest, the emotional centre, and are experiencing the world in a completely different way in terms of feeling. And then we flow back into the head. And then there is a flow into the body. So we are experiencing the world in terms of sensations, movements. And then there is a flow back to the chest. So again, we are experiencing the world in terms of feelings. Back to the body, and back to the head, and so on, constantly going on. So we can't observe ourselves because we're trapped in this flow of energy between three centres, even though Ouspensky writes there are not three centres in the offering. So this is a structure, three centres. This is an energetic situation. We've fallen into these three centres. We can't maintain ourselves as distinct from having three centres. There should be a fourth entity, us, our individuality. But there isn't, because we don't have the energy for it. And now it's no good making, as I say, machismo efforts to pretend that we can remember ourselves, or can observe ourselves, I beg your pardon. I'll come to self-remembering in a moment. It's no good making machismo efforts to try to exist as distinct from these three centres. It's an energetic situation. Once we have the energies, we can maintain ourselves as separate and as distinct from these three centres. But until we have the energies, we can't. Now, this is an abnormality. So here we have a structure, three centres, a flow of energies between the three centres, that we are trapped in this situation. And it leads to an abnormal psychology, the psychology that we can't observe ourselves. We don't know ourselves at all. We haven't the faintest idea what we're doing, or what we do, or why. Now, within this process of self-observation, and of course it is within this process of self-observation, so again, Ouspensky has misunderstood, misinterpreted Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff says, you have missed the essential thing. You do not remember yourself. That is, we are not present in our observations, which is essentially, this is self-observation. This is what he's pointing out. We're trapped in this structure of three centres, so we don't remember ourselves. We can't remember ourselves because at any one moment we're only in one of the centres, and experiencing ourselves and the world from the viewpoint of that centre. That is, intellectually, or in terms of feeling, or in terms of sensation and movement. Well, this is only a partial, fragmented picture of ourselves. So it is an abnormality of our psychology that we cannot remember ourselves, and that we do not remember ourselves. Ouspensky, after about 2 years of attempts at self-remembering, writes this magical line: attempt at self-remembering gave no results whatsoever, except to show me that we do not do it. It gave no results, except to show him that we do not do it. Gurdjieff said, good, what more do you want? This is it, this is the teaching. We can't remember ourselves. This is an abnormality. Why not? Because we're trapped in an internal structure. We have three centres and a continual flow of energy between these centres. So we always only have a partial vision of the world around us and of ourselves within that world. We can't maintain ourselves as a fourth entity as distinct from these three centres. So here we have the structural situation, the energetic situation that we've fallen into, such a low level that we are trapped in these three centres and the flow of energy between these three centres. And this is an abnormality. We can't maintain ourselves as distinct from these three centres because we don't have the energy. Gurdjieff was explicit in terms of self-remembering. We come to the conclusion, he said, that we must remember ourselves. But quoted by Ouspensky in Search of the Miraculous very accurately. We come to the conclusion that we must remember ourselves, but we can only remember ourselves if we have in ourselves the energies for self-remembering. That is, the energies, the subtle energies, the more subtle energies, to allow ourselves to exist, to maintain ourselves as distinct from having three centres. So that there are four entities. That is, there are three centres, the flow of energy between the three centres, but we are distinct from that and can therefore experience the world around us and can experience ourselves from all three centres, in a sense, at the same time. So we have a complete picture of the world around us and of ourselves. We can remember ourselves, but we can only remember ourselves if we have in ourselves the energies for self-remembering. So Gurdjieff's teaching is this. It's about the energies. How do we produce the energies to get out of this structural situation of being trapped in the situation of having three centres? Now, Ouspensky misunderstood and misinterpreted this completely. The Gurdjieff tradition has done. The teachers in the Gurdjieff tradition have absolutely no idea what Gurdjieff was actually teaching. So, your question, let's get back to your question. Your question is, what structures, what internal structures have we fallen into? And how do they lead to an abnormal psychology? The first example, we have three centres. We've fallen into a structural situation. We have three centres, as we should, but we are trapped in those three centres. We can't maintain ourselves because we don't have the energies in us to do so. We can't maintain ourselves as distinct from those three centres. So at any one time, we experience the world around us, we experience ourselves, our own psychology is always only operating from one centre of the three. And by the time we realise it is operating from one centre, it's already moved to another centre. And so we have a fragmented picture of the world around us and a fragmented picture of ourselves. And this is an abnormal psychology. This leads to abnormality. So the fact that we have fallen into the internal structure of having three centres and are trapped in these three centres leads to an abnormal psychology in which we can't observe ourselves and which we can't remember ourselves. And this is an energetic situation, and it is a structural situation. And we can't remedy it by psychological means. We can't remedy it by attempts at self-observation. We can't remedy it by attempts at self-remembering because we don't have the energies for these things. They don't work. This is what Gurdjieff writes and says explicitly. Attempts at self-remembering gave no results whatsoever except to show me that we do not do it. This is what Ouspensky writes. Good, says Gurdjieff. A man who knows this already knows very much. But what does he know? It's not that he knows Ouspensky's teaching, it's that he knows the problem. We're in a structural situation, an energetic situation, and have, in consequence, an abnormal psychology. Now, the other structural situation that is obvious from Gurdjieff's teaching comes, and we can see it in Gurdjieff's writings, the book The Tales of Beelzebub, his grandson. Even though it's not mentioned at all in the Gurdjieff tradition, and I've never heard any Gurdjieff teacher mention this as Gurdjieff's teaching. But from the start of this book, his own book, Gurdjieff says that we have two consciousnesses having nothing in common. We have two consciousnesses having nothing in common. Now what does this mean? It's a statement to say that we have two conscious minds having nothing in common. They're not connected. We are living in the wrong one, Gurdjieff says. We've fallen to such a low energetic level that we fall into a conscious mind, we create in ourselves, in effect, a conscious mind, the abnormal external conditions of ordinary being existence established by us ourselves. We fall into a conscious mind that is a false, fictitious and unreal consciousness. And it doesn't have a true state of consciousness. It has a state of consciousness known as waking sleep. This is a structure. We have two conscious minds. Gurdjieff reiterates again and again in his book, The Tales of Beelzebub, to his grandson. We have two consciousnesses, two conscious minds having nothing in common. We are living in the wrong one. So again, it's a structural situation. That we are living in a consciousness, a conscious mind, that is not a true consciousness. It doesn't have a true state of consciousness. We are living in waking sleep. We are not living in the state that we should be in, consciousness of self, which is the state of consciousness of our subconscious mind, which should be, Gurdjieff says, our true consciousness. And this is an energetic situation. We're living this way because we don't have the energies in ourselves for our true conscious mind to manifest. So again, it's a structural situation, two consciousnesses, two conscious minds having nothing in common. We are living in the wrong one. And it leads to an abnormal psychology. We are living in a false, fictitious and unreal conscious mind that is not really conscious, but lives in a state of waking sleep. It's an abnormality. And again, I stress that Gurdjieff's teaching is not a simple teaching. It's not the simple teaching of the Gurdjieff tradition. This is a very clever teaching. Very difficult to understand. So perhaps your question, if we go back to your question, because I've talked a bit there. You've asked me, what structural situations are we in? Can I give examples of structural situations that we are in that lead to an abnormal psychology and which we can't get out of by psychological means? We've got to get out of them by energetic means. So one is, we are three-centered or three-brained beings. We are trapped in that situation and it leads to an abnormal psychology. We can't observe ourselves and we can't remember ourselves. So these are two abnormalities of our psychology as a result of this structural situation, being trapped in three centers. And another example, completely different from Gurdjieff's own writings, but not from the Gurdjieff tradition, because he does not mention this once anywhere, nor do any of the Gurdjieff teachers that I have encountered. That we have two consciousnesses, two conscious minds having nothing in common. We are living in the wrong one. And this leads to the fact that, of course, we don't have consciousness of self. And this is an abnormality of our psychology. We don't have consciousness of self. We live in a state of waking sleep as a result of a structural situation, which in turn we are trapped in and have fallen into because of an energetic situation. What is the solution? Gurdjieff is explicit in terms of self-remembering. He says to Uspensky, we come to the conclusion that we must remember ourselves, but we can remember ourselves only if we have in ourselves the energies for self-remembering. So there's nothing to do really with self-remembering. This is just an abnormality of our psychology. What are we going to do about it? What can we do about it? We can only remember ourselves if we have in ourselves the energies for self-remembering. So it is about how do we create these energies? Where do these energies come from? And as I've said, and the origin of your question is, there is a break in the chain of energetic production in us. We don't have the energies we should have. This becomes worse and worse. We adapt to this situation and we create in ourselves an abnormal psychology in which we can't observe ourselves, we can't remember ourselves. We have two conscious minds, we're living in the wrong one, in a state of waking sleep. We don't have consciousness of self. So these are psychological abnormalities as a result of structural situations in which we are trapped as a result of an energetic situation. How do we solve it? We've got to solve it by an energetic solution, a solution in terms of energies, not in terms of psychology, not in terms of philosophy, not in terms of spirituality, not in terms of religion, but in terms of energies. Food. Where do these energies come from?